make no friends in the pits and you take no prisoners. 1 minute you're up $500,000 in soybeans, and the next, boom, your kids don't go to college and they've repossessed your Bentley. Are you with me?
The revolution starts now.
We have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Turn those machines back on!
You are about to enter the Peter Schiff Show.
Show me the money!
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
The Peter Schiff Show is on. Call in now. 855-4-SCHIFF. That's 855-472-4433.
I don't know when they decided that they wanted to make a virtue out of selfishness.
Your money, your stories, your freedom. The Peter Schiff Show.
Welcome, everybody. This is Peter Schiff here at the Peter Schiff Show at SchiffRadio.com. Taking your calls for the next 2 hours, 855-4-SCHIFF, 855-4-SCHIFF. And this is the first Peter Schiff Show now on the Radio America network. So welcome to all the listeners who are listening to the show through one of the affiliates, Radio America. Anyway, markets are getting off to a strong start. I guess maybe some people are relieved that the stock market is, in fact, open after Hurricane Irene was not quite as powerful as a lot of people had feared, although it did knock out the power at my home studio in Weston. So that's why those of you who are looking for the video feed are not finding one today because I am not in my normal studio, so there is no video today. We will hopefully restore that as soon as the power is back on. Well, first of all, let's take a look at what's going on in the markets. The Dow has got a strong opening following some strength in the European markets. I mean, the DAX is having a big day today. It's up about 150 points, which is a pretty big percentage move for that index because it's a lot lower. It's about 2.7%. I think the positive news was there was some consolidation over in Greece and some of the major banks or the big banks in Greece. For some reason, the market liked that. But in any event, all stock markets around the world are up, which means the dollar is down. It's not getting completely clobbered, but the euro is getting close to 145. The bigger movers are in the commodity currencies, the Australian dollar, the New Zealand dollar, the Canadian dollars, all up strongly on the day. The Japanese yen is one of the few currencies in the red, down a little bit. Swedish kroner as well, down a little bit. But the dollar remains weak. We've seen this pattern where stocks go up and the dollar goes down. That is continuing today. Gold is going the other way. It's reversing all of its gains on Friday. Gold's down close to $40. Silver down almost full dollar. Again, people are moving out of the safe havens, gold and silver, into equities. Again, I don't think that this relationship will maintain. I think you're going to see gold going up with stocks and gold going up when stocks are going down because it really is an inflation trade, a liquidity trade. It's not a global growth story. It really has to do with debasement of money, and that is the reason that you're seeing prices rising for everything, including equities. Obviously, some prices, real estate prices, will continue to lag as we work our way through a real estate bubble, despite the fact that the government continues to do the wrong thing with respect to real estate, which is trying to prop prices up as opposed to letting them deflate, which is what the market wants them to do. And the longer the government interferes with that process, the more painful the resolution of these imbalances is ultimately going to be. You know, I wanted to talk a little bit about a piece that came out over the weekend from our old friend Paul Krugman, who now is not only proving that he deserves to win the Nobel Prize for Stupidity, but he may in fact be insane. And, I'm not joking on that. I mean, one of the definitions of insanity, maybe the best definition of insanity, is doing the same thing over and over again, yet expecting a different result. This describes Paul Krugman's attitude to a T. He was criticizing in this article Ben Bernanke's lack of a bold new policy agenda when he spoke at Jackson Hole on Friday. And he thinks that the reason that he's not embarking on this bold agenda is because the Republicans, he calls out Rick Perry in particular for raising the idea that maybe Ben Bernanke was a traitor for printing all this money, and that because of the Fed's fear of how he might offend the Republicans, the Fed is not embarking on the bold initiatives that it otherwise would do, which is, of course, is nonsense. I don't think Ben Bernanke is worried about what Rick Perry or anybody else on the Republican side. You know what? I wonder why he didn't mention Ron Paul. You know, Ron Paul's obviously been a much bit bigger and more consistent critic of Ben Bernanke well before Rick Perry emerged on the scene. But again, you know, the media likes to ignore Ron Paul, and I guess even Paul Krugman wants to get in on the let's pretend Ron Paul doesn't exist bandwagon. But he's saying that Krugman is not doing what he would really like to do because the Republicans are stopping him. And what he does is he brings a paper that Ben Bernanke wrote back in 2000, where he was giving advice to Japan on what Japan should do to stimulate their economy, given the fact that interest rates were already at zero and the Japanese economy remained depressed. He wrote a paper with advice for Japan. And Paul Krugman is lamenting the fact that Ben Bernanke is not following his own advice. And I'm going to read exactly what he says. He says, the paper was not the United States, but America is now very much in a Japan-type economic trap, so we should learn a lot by asking why Ben Bernanke in 2011 isn't taking the advice of Ben Bernanke in 2000. So, Paul Krugman is claiming that Ben Bernanke is not doing any of the things that he told Japan to do back in 2000. So here is a list, and in fact, Paul Krugman actually makes a list of all the things that Ben Bernanke said Japan should have done that we are not doing now in 2011. So here we go. Number one, Ben Bernanke suggested that the Bank of Japan could get Japan's economy moving with a variety of unconventional policies. These could include, one, purchase of long-term government debt to push interest rates down and hence lower borrowing costs. Well, wait a minute. Didn't we do that? Wasn't that QE2? Didn't we purchase $600 billion worth of government bonds for the stated purpose of bringing down interest rates? Wasn't that what QE2 did? Paul Krugman, did he sleep through QE2? But wait a minute. You know, it's QE2 for a reason, because it was the second time we did it. We had QE1. Did he miss QE1 and QE2? I mean, or is it simply that Paul Krugman is upset that we didn't announce QE3 more specifically? But if QE1 didn't work and QE2 didn't work, I mean, why should QE3 be any different? But meanwhile, we already did it, right? We did that. Anyway, let's go on to the second thing that Paul Krugman we should be doing. Number two, an announcement that short-term interest rates would stay near zero for an extended period. Wait a minute. So Paul Krugman is upset that Ben Bernanke didn't say that short-term interest rates would stay near zero for an extended period. Is 2 years not an extended period? I mean, did this guy, is he Whip Van Winkle now? Did he sleep through the entire last couple of weeks? Didn't Ben Bernanke just say that he was going to keep it zero for another 2 years after they've already been at zero for 2 years? So is that not extended up? I mean, what does Paul Krugman think he should stay? 5 years, 10 years? How about this? Maybe he's upset that Ben Bernanke didn't say that interest rates will stay at zero for eternity. Right? Maybe that's the only extended period that Paul Krugman would be willing to accept. Anyway, I'm going to continue this. I got to read all the rest of the things that Paul Krugman says that Ben Bernanke didn't do. Well, he's done them all, and then some. Anyway, don't go away. We'll be back with more of the Peter Schiff Show. So stick around. You're listening to Peter Schiff at SchiffRadio.com, the gold standard in talk radio.
To President Obama, Secretary Geithner, Madam Pelosi, and all of the socialist econ professors across America, We're sorry. Peter Schiff is back on the air.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com, and they're telling me the call-in number, the 855-4-SCHIFF number, is not forwarding properly now. So in the meantime, let me give out the direct number for those of you who want to call in while we iron out the problem with that toll-free number. It's 571-480-4151. That's 571-480-4151 if you want to call the show. Meanwhile, before the break, we were going over the long list of things that apparently, according to Paul Krugman, Ben Bernanke is not doing. And these are the things that he's not doing. Like, he's not buying government bonds, and he hasn't announced that he is going to keep interest rates near zero for an extended period of time. So so far those are two things which Paul Krugman is saying that Ben Bernanke has not done. Of course, he's done them. Anyway, let's go on to the third thing on this list that Ben Bernanke has not tried, and Paul Krugman is confident if he just did this, that the U.S. economy would grow. Here, an announcement that the bank was seeking moderate inflation, setting a target in the 3 to 4% range. Now, wait a minute. Didn't Ben Bernanke already come out like a year ago and say that inflation below 2% was a danger, that we couldn't have inflation less than 2% because it was too close to deflation, that was too big a danger, that if the Fed let inflation go below 2%, that it would be too dangerous, and so that we needed to target an inflation rate north of 2%, maybe 3 to 4%? Isn't that what he already said? In fact, after he said that, I went out and said that the Fed had now redefined its mandate. Instead of price stability, the Fed was now against price stability, because obviously stable prices would mean prices that went up less than 2% in a year. In fact, in order to have price stability, if prices go up in some years, then by definition they need to go down in other years. But Ben Bernanke has already stated that we can never have prices going down, that prices have to always go up, and they have to go up by more than 2% a year. So the Fed's new mandate is to make sure we don't have stable prices, to make sure that prices go up every year. And, of course, Don, the CPI that we just got last week, year-over-year prices are up 3.6%, right in the middle of the range that Paul Krugman says the Fed could target. We're already there. And, of course, the real inflation rate is closer to 10%. It's just that the government doesn't report it accurately. So we're there. Now, he says that the reason we want to have an inflation rate of 3 to 4% is so that we will encourage people to take on more debt and discourage people from saving, right? He doesn't want to save, so he wants to destroy the value of savings with inflation. Well, that's happening. Who's saving? Everybody is spending, especially the government. That is the problem. Now, here's the last thing that Paul Krugman claims that we're not doing, that we could be doing, that Ben Bernanke said that we should do. And he said, quote, an attempt to achieve substantial depreciation of the yen. So in other words, obviously this is about America, so he's saying that the Fed should try to substantially depreciate the dollar. Well, isn't that already happening? In the last month, the dollar hit record lows against the yen, record lows against the Swiss franc. Also, we hit record lows against the Australian dollar. I mean, the dollar is dropping, and of course, it is at an all-time record low. The dollar is getting destroyed in terms of gold. So how much more value does Paul Krugman think the dollar should lose? I mean, it hasn't lost enough value already. It needs to be falling even faster. It is at 16-year lows or something like that against the Chinese RMB. The dollar is dropping against everything. It's even dropping against the euro. Despite all of the problems in Europe, the dollar is dropping. Look where it is against the Canadian dollar. I mean, the Canadian dollar is off its highs, but you need $1.02 to buy a Canadian dollar. It wasn't too long ago where you could buy a Canadian dollar with 60 cents. So the dollar is losing value. It's as low as it's ever been. The dollar index is at 73.5. I mean, it's within a couple of points of an all-time record. Now, maybe the dollar isn't cheap enough for Paul Krugman. Maybe he thinks that the Fed ought to destroy more of our purchasing power, as if oil prices at $87 a barrel are not high enough for Paul Krugman. See, he's upset that you can buy a barrel of oil for just $87. He wants the dollar to lose even more value, so maybe you need $100 to buy a barrel of oil. Maybe $150. How much value does Paul Krugman think the dollar should lose before he thinks that we can get the economy going? You know, again, going from the sublime to the ridiculous, which we do often with Paul Krugman, I just read a listener sent me that he's got some new economic advice for President Obama, and that is that we enact a value-added tax, that we have like a national sales tax, but we don't start it right away. We start it in 2 years. And why should we start it in 2 years? To encourage people to spend money now, rather than wait a couple of years when the tax. What are we going to do then, right? What are we going to do? If we get everybody to buy all the things they would have bought 2 and 3 years from now today, what happens 2 years from now when the spending falls off the edge of a cliff, right? And, of course, we already have the equivalent of a 5% value-added tax taking in effect 2 years. It's called inflation. Believe me, that incentive is already there. We already are incentivizing people to spend money now because it's going to lose value. Why does he think people are pouring into the gold market? Why are they looking for inflation hedges? And, of course, what Paul Krugman still does not understand is that the key to economic growth is not spending. If spending is what drove the economy, we would be in a boom. We have spent like nobody. Right? We have literally spent until we drop. Shop until you drop. We did it. We are the champions. We have got the gold medal in spending. We spent everything. We spent everything we had, and we spent money we didn't have. We spent ourselves into bankruptcy. The nation is broke. The government is broke. The people are broke. We're drowning in debt because we borrowed money to consume. You do not get out of a hole by digging it deeper, but apparently that's what Paul Krugman thinks you do. No, you get out of the hole by you don't dig it any deeper, and then you fill it back up. So what the economy really needs is the exact opposite of what Paul Krugman wants to encourage. We need less spending. We need more savings. If we have more savings, then we'll have more capital investment. If we have more capital investment, we'll create more jobs. We'll produce more stuff. We'll be able to grow the economy. We'll export. We'll be able to have economic growth and prosperity. If we keep on borrowing and spending and printing, we will destroy the economy, right? We will completely obliterate it. We have done every single thing that Paul Krugman says we should do. We have already done it, and it has failed. And so what does Paul Krugman think? Do it again. Do more of it. We poured a bunch of gasoline on the fire, and it didn't go out. In fact, it's getting bigger. So what do? We got to pour on more gasoline. We just didn't put on enough. If we just put more gasoline on that fire, Paul Krugman is convinced it will go out, which means there is only one explanation. He really is insane. Anyway, we'll go back. We'll take your calls at 571-480-4151, 571-4851 when we come back, so stick around. Also, I got some sound from Dick Morris, very interesting, as he continues to beat up on Ron Paul. We'll beat up on him a little bit, so stick around.
We now return to the Peter Schiff Show. Call in now, 855-4-SCHIFF. That's 855-472-4433. Radio, the Peter Schiff Show.
And we are back. You are listening to the Peter Schiff Show at SchiffRadio.com. And, hey, before the break, I made a mistake. I inadvertently attributed something to Paul Krugman that actually wasn't his. I mean, I guess he's said enough stupid things that I don't need to throw some extra ones on there, although I'm sure that Paul Krugman would completely agree with would completely agree with that policy, but it's not Paul Krugman. I guess the names are kind of familiar. So it's Kruger, he is the head of the Council of Economic Advisors for the president. So it's Kruger, not Krugman, that came up with this policy of a national VAT or sales tax that would start in a couple of years so that people would hurry up and go out and buy stuff before they had to pay extra. So, hey, it's a good thing we have brains like that chairing the Council of Economic Advisors. You know, we really ought to eliminate the President's Council of Economic Advisors. We ought to fire. In fact, we should fire everybody in Washington who has the word economist in their job description because it's a complete waste. You know, we didn't even have a Council of Economic Advisors until the Second World War. So, I mean, how did this country make it from President George Washington through, I guess, I forget if it was Roosevelt or Harry Truman. I think maybe it was Truman. How did we make it? Or maybe it was Eisenhower. Maybe somebody can remember exactly when it started. I thought it was maybe the 40s or 50s that we initially first had the Council of Economic Advisors. But how did we make it? How did all these great presidents manage to preside over this country without any economic advisors whatsoever? How did we manage to have the Industrial Revolution? Right? We did all that. The most prosperous period of time in American history, the fastest growth that we've ever had as a nation was really between the end of the Civil War, maybe the 1870s, and the beginning of the First World War. That period of time, that 50-year period of time, was the most prosperous period in American history where we raised our living standards the fastest. We had the most economic growth over any 50-year period. Of course, it was the 50 years where we were on the purest
then
gold.
You say the gold standard? Are you?
Somebody just unfortunately played a clip. But anyway, we had the most prosperous period in our history back then. And there weren't any economic advisors in Washington. Maybe that's part of the reason. Maybe the reason that the country was so prosperous, maybe one of the reasons we had so much economic growth is because we had no economists giving advice to our leaders. So we certainly should go back to that, you know, given the horrible advice that the president is now getting. And, of course, all presidents have gotten very bad advice. Anyway, though, before I go, I want to play some of that sound that you just heard inadvertently. Somebody had a fat finger and pushed the button in advance. But I think before I do that, I want to grab one phone call because the call was on the topic of Paul Krugman. Trying to find who that was. Yeah, it's Matt calling from Cocoa Beach, Florida. Matt, welcome to the show.
Hey, Peter. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for calling.
Yeah, I had a quick comment and a question. As far as Paul Krugman, it seems like he could test his own economic theories. What if he, I think he should do this, if he hired a bunch of unemployed people to come over to his own residence and then pay them to destroy his entire house, break the windows, destroy the furniture, and then he would have to rebuild everything, basically boosting his own personal economy.
Yeah, well, he would say it doesn't work on a micro level. He would say that for an individual, if your house is destroyed, it's a bad thing. But somehow for a nation, if everybody's house is destroyed, it's a good thing. See, Keynesianism doesn't work on a family level or a personal level, but somehow it magically is different when it's on a society level. And I mentioned this, you know, in my introduction in the book, How an Economy Grows and Why It Crashes. We talk about this seeming paradox that, you know, what is bad for us individually is somehow good for us collectively. Like Krugman will say that, well, from an individual, it's not a good thing if an individual is deep in debt. It's good if an individual has savings for retirement, has money set away for their kids' college. I mean, all of this is a good thing. He says the problem is if we all save, then it's bad. So, but it's all nonsense. Obviously, what's good for an individual is good for society because society is nothing more than a collection of individuals.
Yeah, and the scary thing is people like him are, you know, basically just like you said, advising our presidents. The other question I had is considering everything that's going on with Bank of America and all of these banks, in my lifetime, I'm 32 right now, do you think that they will ever reinstate mark-to-market accounting? Because it seems like if they had to mark-to-market the way that they did, you know, up until the end of 2008, that all of these banks would basically just be insolvent one more time.
Oh, yeah, that's what they're doing again. It's called mark to myth. I mean, you know what happened was one of the reasons that we finally had that financial crisis, or we had some of the hedge funds like that Bear Stearns had that were in subprime. One of the reasons that they failed was because we required them to mark to market. So once we required banks to mark assets to market, and we found out how low these assets were worth, and they started to fail, the solution was not to deal with the problem, but to, again, pretend it didn't exist by go back to marking to myth. And so, but the problem with this is that problem banks, instead of having to fix the problems, they get worse, and more capital is attracted to insolvent institutions because the institutions are pretending that they're solvent. And so they end up getting even more deposits, and so when they ultimately fail, it's a bigger loss. That's what's going to happen. Eventually, the thing is when you're forcing institutions to mark to market, they're recognizing the risks that exists, and they're recognizing the problems with their balance sheet. But when you say you don't have to do that, then you can pretend that those problems don't exist. It doesn't mean that they go away, but ultimately it just means that the problems get worse instead of get better because the banks are giving out bad information to the market.
So you probably don't think that they're going to reinstate it then, because otherwise they would have to raise a tremendous amount of capital then.
Yeah, no, they're not going to reinstate. They're not going to reinstate it until after the real crisis comes. Until after we get the collapse of the dollar, the collapse of the bond market, runaway inflation, until the whole U.S. economy implodes and there's rioting in the streets, there's looting and protests, and until we are in real crisis, real pandemonium, that's the only time the government's ever going to do the right thing, if they do the right thing at all.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you very much, Peter.
Thanks for the call. Hey, so I want to go and play some of these Dick Morris clips. And if you remember, those longtime listeners, and if you didn't actually hear my interview with Dick Morris in real time, you can go back in the archives. In fact, you can also look at the YouTube, Peter Schiff, Dick Morris. He was on my show and wasn't on very long because he hung up quite quickly. Basically, he wanted to promote his book on how to fight Obama's socialism with his own version of socialism, when he had the gall to come on this show and claim that the government should test every single American, drug test everybody, drug test all college students who want college loans. And I actually said, well, hey, instead of drug testing the students, why don't we eliminate government-guaranteed student loans? And he went ballistic because the socialist, Bill Morris, believes that the government should be extremely involved in college education. The government should be funding everybody's college. The government should be guaranteeing all these loans. It's just that with all the loan guarantees, we want mandatory drug tests. So in other words, the government through loan guarantees is jacking up the price of college so that the only way people can go to college now is with a government loan instead of being able to go on the cheap, which was the case before the government got involved. And when people used to graduate without debt, now they graduate with mortgages without houses. Dick Morris thinks that's a great idea, especially since by forcing students to have to borrow money to go to overpriced universities that without those loans they could have afforded, now we can force them to submit to drug tests administered by the U.S. government. Anyway, that maybe is Dick Morris's version of freedom, but it's not mine. But anyway, Dick Morris was on bashing Ron Paul, as he did, again, in his brief appearance on my show. So we got a few cuts, and this is on Bill O'Reilly on Fox News, the O'Reilly Factor. And, of course, they're not a big fan over there of the Ron Paul campaign over at Fox News. They do have him on every once in a while now, but they were not big fans back in 2008, and they're still not fans now. But anyway, here's the first cut number 7.
Ron Paul, he's whining to Megan, ignore me, and then we invite him on, he doesn't show up.
Well, he won't face you because he doesn't want to face questioning.
He wants to give a speech, right?
He's fine when he gives a speech.
Right.
But then you probe him and you say, are you saying that Iran will not develop the bomb and that if they do, they're not going to use it against Israel? And if they do, it's okay with you?
Well, obviously it's not okay with Ron Paul if Iran drops a nuclear bomb on Israel. It's not okay at all. He's putting words into the congressman's mouth. But what I really want to talk about, at least right now, is O'Reilly's comments that Ron Paul is whining. Yeah, but first of all, he's not whining. In fact, he is actually being very gentlemanly about the fact that the media is completely ignoring his candidacy, given the fact that he almost won Ames, that he just barely got beat by somebody who is lower than him in the polls, right? Michelle Bachmann is polling below Ron Paul nationally and in New Hampshire and in Iowa. That The fact that he got no coverage. The fact that people who got a lot less coverage. In fact, the guy that dropped out because he did so poorly at Ames got a lot more coverage than Ron Paul, the guy that almost won it. So the fact that he is getting no media attention whatsoever and is handling it as graciously as he has, he's not whining at all. You know, the whiner is Bill O'Reilly. But what happened? They finally wanted to have him on the show. And I guess he had a scheduling conflict, so he couldn't be on the show the exact time or the exact day they wanted him. And so now they're acting like, well, he's refusing to go on the show, which is obviously nonsense. But, you know, I guess Bill O'Reilly is upset that Ron Paul didn't drop everything in his schedule and bow down and worship before Bill O'Reilly and Fox News. Oh, my God, you're willing to have me on. I better drop everything, and I better be there right away. Who is the whiner? It's not Ron Paul. Anyway, but now I want to go a little bit further to show how completely ignorant this guy Dick Morris really is. Here, play cut number 8.
Then you say the gold standard. Are you literally saying that the United States of America's economy should only be allowed to grow as much as gold can be extracted from the earth? And if there's no gold discovered, our economy has to stay small? You ask him about drug lords. Are you seriously saying that we should not be fighting drugs in the United States but should legalize it all?
All right, so first of all, let's go to his comments on the gold standard, because obviously Dick Morris doesn't understand anything about the gold standard. I mean, what an absurd statement that he thinks that under a gold standard you can only grow an economy as fast as you can extract gold from the earth. That is utter nonsense. It shows that his intelligence or his understanding of the gold standard. I mean, maybe he is stoned himself. Maybe he smoked a lot of dope or something before he did this interview, because I don't think anybody straight or sober could possibly be so ridiculous and ignorant about the gold standard as a Dick Morris. But anyway, we got a break. I will come back and talk more about Dick Morris and the gold standard after this break, so stick around.
The Peter Schiff Show. Since the Peter Schiff Show was last on the air, the national debt added another $7.89 million. Luckily, Peter's intelligence is growing twice as fast.
That's incredible.
Welcome back to your source of sanity in an insane world. It's the Peter Schiff Show.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. And we're taking your calls live. I know the phone number that we're using is not the phone number that you are used to. We're having problems with that 800 number. I don't know if we've cleared them up yet, but if you do have a call, it's 571-480-4145, 571-480-4145. Before the break, we were talking and playing some sound from Dick Morris, who claims that under a gold standard, the economy can only grow as fast as you can pull money from the ground or mine gold, which means that Dick Morris thinks that economic growth is a function of how much money you print. So I guess according to Dick Morris, the more money you print, the faster your economy could grow. Well, if that's true, why isn't the Zimbabwe economy growing, $1 trillion %? I mean, how fast has money supply grown there? Economic growth and money supply growth have nothing to do with one another. You don't have to grow the money supply to grow the economy. In fact, if you keep the money supply stagnant, or if you only allow it to grow a little bit, history shows you get far more economic growth, because what grows the economy is production. That's what makes an economy grow. Money is simply a means of dividing up that production. So what happens under a real gold standard, where you have an economy that's growing far faster than the supply of money, you get falling prices, which is exactly what we got for the first 120 years of this country. Prices fell consistently because the economy grew much faster than the money supply, and so standard of living improved because money bought more, because the things that Americans needed to buy got cheaper every year because of how fast the economy was growing. I mean, I mentioned earlier in the show that I think the most productive period of time in American history, where we had the fastest economic growth, where we had the biggest increase in living standards, was after the Civil War and before the First World War, maybe just say 1870 to 1920 or around that time period. That's when we had the biggest advancements. That's when we migrated all these Americans from the farms into the cities. They went from working on a farm to working in a factory. I mean, if an American went to sleep in 1870 and woke up 50 years later in 1920, it'd be like, going, traveling to a different planet. He would be shocked. Because remember, in 1870, most Americans read by candlelight. They rode on horses. The bathroom was an outhouse in the backyard. They had to bathe in a tub where they poured water into it by heating it on a fire. They were making their own clothes. They were growing their own food. I mean, people in 1870 didn't live much different than they did in 1670 or 1570. But if you go forward, 50 years, people, what were they doing? I mean, people were living in the cities. They were living in high rises. They had indoor plumbing. They had electricity. They had automobiles. We had planes. We had indoor plumbing. You had mass production. You had appliances. You had refrigerators. You had vacuum cleaners. You had washing machines. You had radios. You had telephones. I mean, you had all these things that didn't even exist. I mean, the difference between 1870 and 1920, the difference there is bigger than the difference between today and 1920. I mean, the only things that we have today that we didn't have back then are computers and television. That's basically it. I mean, we have better stuff. Yes, they didn't have iPods back then, but they had phonographs. They had record players. In 1870, if you wanted music, you had to play it yourself. So there's a big difference between having to play your own music on your own instrument and going to a record than the difference between a record and an iPod. I mean, yes, the technology is better, but the difference, the bigger impact on the quality of life happened back then. So we had massive, massive economic growth during the time period we were on a gold standard, on a pure gold standard. Of course, we remained on a gold standard, a watered-down gold standard, but we remained on a gold standard until 1971. So does Dick Morris really think we had no real economic growth? What about the 1950s? What about that whole post-war boom? We were on a gold standard during that period of time. Obviously, our economic growth was not restricted to the amount of gold that can be mined in South Africa. Is he nuts? I mean, we ought to drug test Dick Morris, because he's got to be on something to say something so stupid. Anyway, here's his last clip. Actually, before I go to that, I want to get to his mention on the war on drugs. Now, Ron Paul is against drugs. He's a physician, right? I mean, he knows a lot more about medicine and the impact of drugs than Dick Morris. The reason that Ron Paul is against the war on drugs is because drugs are winning. They're winning that war. And the problem is that the drug laws and the war on drugs is doing more harm than the drugs themselves. You see, Ron Paul is a practical, intelligent man, and Dick Morris is not. Ron Paul can connect the dots. As bad as drugs are, Ron Paul knows that the drug laws are worse. You see, Dick Morris doesn't care. He's all about form. There's no substance there. He wants to pretend, I'm against drugs, so I want a real tough war on drugs, despite the fact that the consequence on the war on drugs is that there's more drug use now than there would be without it, and he's turned drugs into a criminal problem, not just a health problem. See, Ron Paul actually cares about what happens. He's not trying to just talk in sound bites to be popular. He's looking at the facts. And, if you think that the war on drugs is working, well, then you should go to look at Prohibition and see how that worked. Alcohol use actually increased. They have facts that show that during Prohibition that people actually drank more alcohol. There were more speakeasies in New York during Prohibition than bars before. And, of course, what did Prohibition do? It gave birth to the mob, to the Al Capones, to, all this stuff. Organized crime, it really got going under Prohibition because they had all the profits from illegal alcohol. And now we have the same thing today. We have modern-day Prohibition, and it doesn't work. Ron Paul knows it. Dick Morris is clueless. Anyway, hey, don't go away. We've got more, including a great guest coming up after the break, so stick around. You're listening to The Peter Schiff Show on SchiffRadio.com.
The Peter Schiff Show.
You make no friends in the pits and you take no prisoners. 1 minute you're up $500,000 in soybeans and the next, boom, your kids don't go to college and they've repossessed your Bentley. Are you with me?
The revolution starts now.
We have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Turn those machines back on!
You are about to enter the Peter Schiff Show.
Show me the money!
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on Earth.
The Peter Schiff Show is on. Call in now. 855-4-SHIFT. That's 855-472-4433.
I don't know when they decided that they wanted to make a virtue out of selfishness.
Your money, your stories, your freedom. The Peter Schiff Show.
Welcome back, everybody. The second hour of the Peter Schiff Show is underway. And joining me now is Glenn Morton, who is the owner of a Maryland-based insurance brokerage company, Taylor Levi and Associates. And he's also the author of a book, Passing Obamacare, How to Handle Uninsured Americans Without a Federal Takeover of the Healthcare Industry. Glenn, welcome to the show.
Hi, Peter. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
I'm good. Thanks for coming on. So you are an insurance broker, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, you know, my father for years was an insurance broker, and I have mentioned on the show, my father used to sell health insurance in the 1960s and 50s and 60s before Medicare was enacted, and he tells me that his most popular insurance plan, which he sold to most people, cost less than $2 a month. And that's all it took for most Americans to buy health insurance, $2 a month. I mean, even if you adjusted that for inflation, you're still talking about a fraction of what Americans pay today for health insurance. So what are the problems that you see with Obamacare, and what are your market-based solutions to what I believe is a government-created problem?
Well, it actually is a government-created problem, but not in the way that a lot of people would suspect. The reason that we have this situation is because the people who are deciding on what risk protection to buy and the people whose risk are being protected are not the same people, because we have an employer-based market. So an employer cannot know your individual situation. So, they necessarily have to buy blanket policies, to cover their employees. So when individuals like you and I want health insurance to cover something, we're interested because, that's how we access care. The only avenue we have to try to affect change in an insurance policy is to go to, currently our state government and say, hey, this should be covered. There are people who aren't accessing the care that they need because this isn't covered on an insurance policy.
Of course,
so,
and
then
the problem with that, though, is that when the government mandates that insurance companies cover certain things, what if you don't want that coverage? You're forced to take it. So people have to buy insurance policies that cover things that they really don't want to cover, but they have to pay for it anyway. And, of course, the whole reason that we have this employer-based system is because of the tax code. This is a creation of government policy. If we didn't have the tax code the way it was, people would get their health insurance the same way they get their life insurance or their automobile insurance. They would buy it on their own, and it would be a lot less expensive.
And not only that, it would allow for competition to be created in the marketplace. What I would like people to understand is when you petition government and you ask it to do something, if it agrees with you, it does that through force of law. And law, by nature, is limiting. It tells you what can't be done also. Mm-hmm. So when you have a product like, insurance, where the commodity being sold in insurance is money, right? So when you have a product like that and you reduce all the other ways somebody could access that money by limiting it through force of law, what you do is you create a situation where all the insurance carriers are required to essentially sell the same thing. And once you get to that point, then the only difference between one carrier and another is the amount of money that they have. The largest carriers can eliminate competition with some of the smaller carriers because they have the most cash reserves available to employ the strategy of, reducing the price of their dollar in comparison to their competitors' dollar and buying up the supply and the demand of the healthcare marketplace, the individuals like you and I, and then the, supply, which is, the doctors, the pharmacies,
sure,
things of that nature.
Well, don't you also have... Yeah, as I was saying, don't you also have, too, as far as many of the state governments restrict the ability of insurance companies in other states to sell insurance to residents of their state, so you really limit the competition. And then you have the federal government that makes it illegal for Japanese insurance companies or Swiss insurance companies to sell insurance products in the United States. So, if we can buy foreign cars, why can't we buy foreign health insurance? Why is it illegal?
Well, and I think that any area where there isn't a demonstrated insurable interest, like in other words, if somebody who purchases an insurance policy has no way of claiming some of the features of that policy, I think that just gives insurance companies money, and there's no, financial remuneration in return. So if you, instead of being trapped by that, right, because, currently in America, there are over 2,100 health insurance company mandates across 50 states, and that's a lot of things that can't be done, right? So if you just have something alongside of that, because obviously you're never going to get 50 states to agree on anything, if you just have something alongside of that that gives people the ability to select insurance based on the risk that they feel they have, as an individual person or as a household, then, you substantially reduce the cost of insurance.
Of course, and the thing is, though, but that is a choice that individuals would be able to make right now if the government wasn't preventing it from happening. So it's not that the government has to give us this freedom. The government has to stop taking it away. It's government regulation that is preventing that from happening right now.
Well, I'm not the I'm not the biggest fan of government, lately, so there's a lot, to agree with what you said. One of the things I do want to say is that, out of all entities that have control over our lives, government's the only one that we actually have a say in, and we get the government that we ask for ultimately. So, when we think that the only solution to what seems to be an important problem is to ask the government to take care of it, then, you have to, if you don't, you have to understand what that means for people who might not necessarily have the same issue that you do. It means that they pay more, and that doesn't have to be the case. It's just the case right now.
Yeah, well, what did you mean by of all the institutions that have control over our lives? What other institutions have control over our lives other than government?
Well, we can talk about corporations. The reason that
but corporations don't control me. What corporations control us?
Well, okay. So the reason that we are able to do the things that we are able to do in American society is based on the extent to which we have control over our money.
Right, and with a corporation, I have complete control over my money when I deal with any corporation. If a corporation wants to sell me a product or a service, I have to voluntarily buy it. The place I don't have control is government. Government takes my money from me whether I want to or not. It can throw me in jail. So it's government that has force. That's the institution that controls our lives. We have no say in that. I have complete say in with corporations because they have to convince me to voluntarily give them my money, and they can only do that if they provide me with a good or a service that I value and that I want. But anyway, we'll continue this healthcare discussion after this commercial break. So don't go away. You're listening to the Peter Schiff Show here on SchiffRadio.com.
The Peter Schiff Show. To President Obama, Secretary Geithner, Madam Pelosi, and all of the socialist econ professors across America, we're sorry. We're sorry. Peter Schiff is back on the air.
Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. This is Peter Schiff speaking with my guest, insurance salesman and author, Glenn Morton. Hey, Glenn, do you notice that one of the big problems now with the modern day thinking regarding insurance is that it's not really insurance at all, but people are looking for prepaid health care, that people think that insurance should cover everything, that if they get sick, if they sprain their ankle, if a woman gets pregnant, that all these routine medical procedures should somehow cost nothing and they should all be paid for by an insurance company?
Yeah, I do see a lot of that, and it's mainly because the attention is paid more into the healthcare aspect of that transaction, not the financial aspect of it. And everybody should know that whenever you have an intermediary, between you and your purchasing decisions, in this case insurance, it's going to charge extra for the privilege. So the more you reduce the level to which they would reimburse something down to, a $4 generic drug or, a $75, office visit, the more you do that, the less it becomes insurance in the traditional sense, which is, a bunch of people making small payments so that in an unlikely or unforeseen event, a claim can be paid, to really more like a credit card, an intermediary between supply and demand that charges an interest percentage, for the privilege of standing between you and your purchasing decision.
Yeah, I mean, people have to realize that, when you have automobile insurance, you have a deductible. Generally, people have a $500 or $1,000 deductible, and so that's in case you have a big accident. You don't have insurance to cover the gasoline for the car. If you need an oil change, if you need a new windshield wiper blade, you pay for those things yourself. The same thing with homeowners insurance. You have insurance in case your house burns down, not in case your toilet overflows or, in case your drain is clogged. I mean, we pay for these things ourselves. So people have to understand that it's the same thing with health care. You don't have insurance in case you get the flu, in case you have a cold, or in case you sprain your ankle or you do small things that require routine medical care. Those are things that you pay for out of pocket. Health insurance is for cancer, for a brain tumor. If you get hit by a truck, it's not for things that are likely to happen. It's for things that are unlikely to happen.
Well, and look, there are plenty of people in this world, no matter how much it costs, they want to be protected against everything related to their health, because anything that happens to them, they didn't know that was going to happen ahead of time. So I'm not saying that there's not a market for that. I'm saying that this should not only be
right. But that would be very expensive health care. What would be a lot cheaper is if you set aside some money in a savings account so that if something unexpected happens that's routine, you pay for it in your savings account. That's a lot cheaper than to overpay for insurance month after month, year after year.
Well, and insurance companies know that, right? And so do, by the way, the providers of our care. When we pay for things that we are at no risk of assuming, we really do subsidize that part of the healthcare delivery system. So even if you never, went to a mental health professional, the fact that you are contributing to mental health coverage helps the insurance company to pay for somebody else to go. So if that's not what you considered to be risk protection, and you wanted to look at your own bank account and your own health situation and the health situation of your family, and, be able to make a purchasing determination, based on that, then you absolutely should be allowed to do that. And I'm glad that you mentioned, by the way, car insurance and homeowners insurance, because health insurance is the only type of insurance in existence today where you don't have the choice of what to cover, where you have to buy a blanket policy that covers everything. But imagine how much car insurance would be if it did cover the oil change or, some other, type of situation. And then imagine the federal government coming in and saying, look, car insurance is too high. We've got 50 million people that can't afford car insurance. So we are going to create a law that has a mobile penalty so that even people who walk or ride a bicycle have to buy car insurance. Mm-hmm. And that is a direct parallel to what is going on now with Obamacare. I mean, look, if you don't drive a car, you shouldn't have to buy car insurance. If you don't own a home, you shouldn't have to buy homeowners insurance. And if I don't own a uterus, I shouldn't have to buy maternity coverage.
Well, absolutely. And, even if you have a uterus, you shouldn't have to buy maternity covers. What if you have no intention of having a child? What if you're sterile? And what if you've already gone through menopause? I mean, there are a lot of people, a lot of women that don't need maternity coverage that shouldn't have to buy it.
Well, and this is where I try to. I'm an average citizen, right? So I'm not a politician, and I haven't been in the game. And from what I see from the outside, I think everybody has the best intentions. Everybody feels like there's a right way to do something, even if all evidence to the contrary presents itself. It's very difficult to get people to say, oops, my bad, when they're in the public eye. But, having said that, when we see that a government is going to make a mistake to the degree that they are making a mistake here, where they are taking our purchasing decisions away from us, where they're saying that they have a better use for our money than we do, if we don't, stand up as Americans, to protect that right, then, we get the government that we asked for. We get a government that basically, tells us what to do at every point in our entire lives because they have more stake in our earnings than we do.
Yeah, and what we have to understand, the reason that there is a cost problem with health care is because the free market no longer is allowed to function in healthcare. The government has come in and screwed it up, and that's why it's so expensive. Everything. Education is another example. Anything that the government infects, it's going to screw up. Any industry that the government dominates, what you're going to see is costs exploding. And then what happens is we wonder, gee, why is education so expensive? Why is healthcare so expensive? And we look for a government-backed solution when the government is the cause. What we need is free market solutions so that we have the same type of dynamics operating in healthcare and education that we have in computers, that we have in cell phones, that we have in all areas of our lives that the government hasn't screwed up.
Well, and look, how did we get to the point, now that you mentioned, cell phones? When I was growing up, there was one telephone company. It was AT&T. They had a monopoly on the market. And I had to pay a per-minute charge just to call somebody in a different area code, even if they were a couple miles away.
Absolutely. The answer was free market competition, innovation, not government involvement. Anyway, hey, thanks for being on the show. Good luck with your book and with your insurance practice. Thanks for being a guest. Everybody else, stick around. We have another full half hour coming up on the Peter Schiff Show here at SchiffRadio.com.
From here, somewhere more familiar. Oh my God, I can't believe it. I've never been this far away from home. Oh my God, I can't believe it.
The Peter Schiff Show. We now return to the Peter Schiff Show. Call in now, 855-4-SCHIFF. That's 855-472-4433. Radio. The Peter Schiff Show.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. I think we're still having a problem with the telephone number to call, the toll-free number. So if you do want to call the show, it is, let me find the new number. What happened to it? I had a list of the numbers here. I'm looking for it. Oh, 571-480-4190. 4151. 571-480-4151 if you want to call. Anyway, before the end of the last hour, I was playing some of the clips from Dick Morris on the O'Reilly Show, and I was about the gold standard, and I still hadn't played the final clip, and I want to play his last clip and then talk a little bit about that on what he had to say about the gold standard. This is cut number 9.
I don't think he would say yes on the gold standard because that's impossible. So if he did that, then
no, he's for the gold standard.
But it's not as clear cut as that. He just wants it to back up the currency, not to
you
be.
Can't print more currency unless more gold is mined, and ultimately it means your whole economic expansion is hostage to how much a South African gold mine produces.
All right.
So again, saying that your economic expansion is held hostage, that the economy can only expand to the extent that the money supply expands. Money means nothing. It doesn't matter how much money there is. What matters is how much stuff there is. The money just determines what the stuff is priced, how much you sell the stuff for. But if you don't produce stuff, it doesn't matter how much money you have. You're just going to have inflation. You're just going to have higher prices. But I happen to have – I went over to Wikipedia, which I guess maybe Dick Morris never did. And I looked up here, Gilded Age. And the Gilded Age in America is basically the 1870s, the 1880s, the period of time after the Civil War, but before, I guess, the First World War that I talked about. And it was labeled the Gilded Age by Mark Twain and Charles Warner coined it in their book, The Gilded Age, A Tale of Today. And basically, the reason it's the Gilded Age, and I'm reading here from Wikipedia, during the 1870s and 1880s, the U.S. economy grew at the fastest rate in its history, with real wages, wealth, GDP, and capital formation all increasing rapidly. For example, between 1865 and 1898, the output of wheat increased by 256%, corn 222%, coal 800%, and railway tracks 567%. Thick national networks for transportation and communication were created. The corporation became the dominant form of business. The managerial revolution transformed business operations. By the beginning of the 20th century, per capita income and industrial production in the United States led the world, with per capita income double that of Germany or France, 50% higher than Great Britain. And we don't have that kind of lead today. But remember, before that period of time, we were way behind Europe in those metrics. We not only caught them, but we surpassed them. We had rapid economic growth. Of course, we had all the so-called robber barons, the great captains of industry, John Rockefeller, Andrew Mellon, Andrew Carnegie, Henry Flagler, J.P. Morgan, Cornelius Vanderbilt, the Astors. All of these huge fortunes were amassed under a gold standard. And not only was our money backed by gold, it was gold. There was no Federal Reserve. People were walking around with gold coins in their pockets. There was no central bank during that period of time. Yet we had a more rapid expansion of U.S. economy, of standard of living, of economic growth. Remember, we absorbed all those waves of immigrants. I mean, we complain today about immigration. It's nothing compared to the number of immigrants that were flooding America's shores during that period of time. And the economy absorbed them without any unemployment. And we grew. And we did that not despite the fact that we were on a gold standard, but in large part because we were on a gold standard. And what that meant, a gold standard means limited government. It means high savings. It means capital formation. It means job creation. It means honest government. Government can only spend what it collects in taxes. It means you don't have all the debt. You don't have all the money printing. You don't have all the things that we have today. Yes, that's exactly what we need. We need a return to the gold standard. And if Ron Paul could actually deliver that, that would be fantastic. Although I believe it would be difficult to achieve given the political opposition. But as I mentioned earlier in the show, once we really hit rock bottom in this economy, and believe me, we're going to do that, once we really overdose on government spending and money printing, and the dollar collapses, and prices go through the ceiling, and unemployment goes ballistic, and there is the rioting and the looting, and all the things that we're seeing now in Europe, only on a grander scale, Once all that happens, maybe, just maybe, there will be enough of a political uproar that we will return to a gold standard. And maybe by then Dick Morris will have some appreciation. Maybe will have sobered up by then and kicked his own drug habit, which again I think he obviously has one, because if he was really in his right mind and could think straight, he obviously wouldn't be saying the things that he is saying. Anyway, let me go back to the telephone calls. We got quite a few people now on hold. First up is going to be John in New York City. John, welcome to the show.
How you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Good. My question is, if we do happen to return to the gold standard, the gold that I have and that I try to get my family to buy, how does that work as far as now going to having the dollar backed by it and bringing it? Are you able to bring it to the bank, and now are you going to be able to exchange your 1/10 or 1/4 ounce of gold for whatever the paper currency is at the time that it's backed by? I mean, how does that system work?
No, well, the only thing that would change if we went back to a gold standard is that the dollars that circulate would be backed by gold. Now, hopefully they would be redeemable in gold at some exchange rate, which would have to be a much higher price of gold than it is today to make it work. But it wouldn't affect the gold that you have in your safety deposit box, other than the fact that gold might be more valuable. But what it would impact is the dollars, the bills that you have in your wallet. Because now, instead of just little pieces of paper that have no intrinsic value, they would suddenly be backed up by something. And what would change is the government's ability to keep printing them. They wouldn't be able to do it unless they had more gold. That's what would change.
I'm sorry. Would you recommend then, if it was backed by the dollar, to still hold on to your physical gold, or if it's backed by these dollars, to be able to exchange them? Maybe
well, you wouldn't. The point is, you wouldn't. If we went back on a gold standard, you wouldn't have to be buying physical gold, because you would own physical gold simply by owning dollars, by owning Federal Reserve notes. Now, to the extent that you could trust the government, if the government was being honest. If it wasn't, then you might have to continue to buy gold. But if we went back to an honest gold standard, your paper money would be backed by gold. So if you had, I don't know what, let's say gold was $5,000 an ounce. If you had $5,000, you would also have an ounce of gold. I mean, they would be equivalent if that was where it ended up being by the time we went on the gold standard. So, and every time you bought something, you would be transacting in gold, because your dollars would be backed by gold. That's exactly the way it was when we were on a gold standard. As late as 1971. It was Nixon devalued twice, but before the devaluation, gold was $35 an ounce. So whenever somebody gave you $35, or you gave somebody $35, you gave them an ounce of gold, because they could take those $35, or at least foreigners could at that point, to the Federal Reserve, and they can get an ounce of gold.
All right, great. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for the call. And also, speaking about gold, I want to mention really briefly, too, while gold is still down about $30 today, looking at the GLD, which is about 1.7%, gold stocks right now are down fractionally, not even 1/10. They're about 1/10 of 1%. So we are seeing a bit of a divergence, and I've been talking about this. This has to happen. Gold stocks, I believe, are so undervalued relative to the price of gold that we are going to have to see some days where gold is going down and gold stocks are going up to catch up. Because right now it's almost been robotic for a while. Gold is down. They trash the gold stocks, and they're not looking at the fundamentals, because the price of gold has already gone up so much that it can fall by hundreds and hundreds of dollars an ounce, and I think gold stocks still have to go up, given how profitable gold mining is going to be, even if you take a substantial decline from here in the price of gold. Anyway, next on the line is John in Iowa calling up to talk, I guess, about Dick Morris. John, welcome to the show.
Hello. Yes, I just wanted to talk about Dick Morris's blatant stupidity. His entire book is titled, what is it, How to Stop Obama's Socialist Agenda.
Exactly,
yeah.
And replace it with his own,
Yeah. But when he talks about a school system, the public school, he makes the exact same argument that the left makes when they want to talk about health care. He's saying that everybody should have access to it and all this stuff, and it's the same nonsense. He just puts public school in place of health care.
Yeah, and not only does he want everyone to have access, but he also wants to drug test everybody.
Yeah, I think somebody needs to drug test him because I don't know where he got this idea that that your economy is based on how much money you print. If that was the case, why don't we just print $5,000 for everybody every month?
As I said,
we have a robust economy. That's
printing
dumb.
money does not determine your growth rate, right? Printing money, it determines your price level. It doesn't determine the amount of stuff that's there. It just determines what the stuff costs. So the more money you print, the more the stuff that you make costs. But because you print more money, that doesn't simultaneously mean you have more stuff. I mean, look how fast the money supply grew in the Soviet Union. They were printing rubles like crazy. It didn't mean that there was any production coming out of Soviet factories. But anyway, hey, thanks for the call. Don't go away. We got another segment coming up here on the Peter Schiff Show on SchiffRadio.com.
The Peter Schiff Show. Since the Peter Schiff Show was last on the air, the national debt added another $7.89 million. Luckily, Peter's intelligence is growing twice as fast.
That's incredible.
Welcome back to your source of sanity in an insane world. It's the Peter Schiff Show.
And we are back. The final segment of the show has arrived. The time has flown by. Anyway, 571-480-4151 is the number to call. 571-480-4151. You know, before the break, again, we were talking about Dick Morris. And, you know, if you haven't heard the Dick Morris interview from my show, it's on the archives. If you're not a member, you know, you can join at SchiffRadio.com. You can sign up to be a premium member. You can listen to all of the archived programs commercial-free when you want. This particular interview, though, is also on my YouTube channel at Schiff Report. You can listen to the Dick Morris clip. But, you know, I really got into the argument with Dick Morris when he brought up drug testing all the college students. And I said, hey, instead of getting the government more involved in college, how about if we get the government out of higher education? What if we have a free market? And what if we have the government, we have an end to guaranteed student loans that's driving up tuition? And he jumped all over me that this was crazy time, that we needed to have big government involved in education. So in other words, he came on my show under the pretense of denouncing socialism, yet instead he was advocating it. He was defending the government's socialization of our education system rather than trying to denounce it and rather than advocating a free market approach. Anyway, but let me go to the phones. Next up is Andrew, also calling from New York City. Andrew, how you doing?
Hey, Peter, how's it going?
Good.
Listen, I just listened to your interview today, and you know, I guess I should make a comment. I don't think that free market is going to be the answer to health care. And to tell you what I think will be, I just want to give you a hypothetical, okay?
Go ahead.
Okay. So you're a 40-year-old father of three. You're working 2 shifts. You're sole provider. And you opt out of health care insurance because you just can't afford it. Now you have a massive heart attack. You're in an ER. What do you feel like you can expect from the hospital and from the system? You got no money or insurance.
But I don't understand. What's your point?
Well, a lot of people basically talk about, you know, being able to make the choice. But when they get into trouble, I think that they expect somebody to step in.
Yeah,
and
but
kind of help them out.
well, no, but what you have to understand is why is it that a man in this day and age, a 40-year-old with 3 kids, couldn't afford insurance? Because during the 1950s and 1960s, the average 40-year-old man without a college degree, working in a blue-collar job, could easily afford that kind of insurance. It was small money. It didn't impact the standard of living of the family. And if he had a heart attack, he could afford it. So the question is, why is it that a man today cannot easily afford what his grandfather could afford? And the reason is government. The reason is back then in the 1950s, the government was not involved. Therefore, health care and health insurance was readily accessible and very inexpensive. And for the few people, the real poor people who couldn't afford it, there was plenty of free medical care out there. Doctors were willing to volunteer their time to take care of the poor for free because almost everybody could afford to pay because it was so inexpensive, because health care was affordable and plentiful when the free market was delivering it. The problem is now that we don't let the free market deliver it. We have the government ration it. We have the government, price set it. And so we have to get market forces back into play. That is the only way that we are going to bring down the cost of health care and the cost of health insurance. And we've got to get the government out of the business of subsidizing insurance. We've got to get insurance out of the employment sector back to the individual sector, and insurance has to be what it's for events that are extremely rare and unlikely to happen, but costly if they do, so that those health insurance is cheap, and that for routine medical care, including a lot of things right now like childbirth, people should not be covering the birth of a child with insurance. They should have the money to pay for it. It shouldn't be expensive, and it should be easy to save for. And people would be saving for it if the government didn't tax them so heavily while they're working. And so we got to go back to that kind of dynamic that was in place, because health care wasn't the problem. Health care was improving. It was getting cheaper. And that's what would happen. I had a guest on the show last week, I don't know if you heard the show, who was an ophthalmologist who does LASIK, and he was one of the pioneers in LASIK surgery, and he was talking about how the fact that LASIK surgery is cheaper now than it first began, whenever it was 20 or 30 years ago, that the procedures are better and the cost is lower. And why is that? It's because of free markets, because all of his patients pay with cash. Insurance is not involved. The government is not involved, and as a result, the cost has gone down. We can have the same benefits, and we used to have the same benefits in health care if we get the government out.
All right. Well, aside from the fact that LASIK is like $5,000 to $8,000 a pop, there are a lot of differences between now and when you're.
Well, no, it's not $5,000. He said it was about $2,500 an eye, and it was more than that. He said it was about $3,000 when it first started. So it's come down in price. And, of course, probably over a lifetime, it's a lot cheaper to get LASIK surgery than to have to keep getting new pairs of glasses all the time and new prescriptions. And, of course, you get a pair of glasses, they break, you lose them, you got to buy another one, you get different. So, I think people save a lot of money with LASIK.
Yeah, okay. The demographics right now are completely different from the 1960s. A lot more old people. Also, in the 1960s, they basically had tongue depressors and penicillin. There were no CAT scanners. The technology that exploded around medical care and the number of people.
But the point is, technology brings the cost down. And look, the 1950s was still pretty sophisticated. They had hospitals, they were doing operations. But the thing is, technology brings costs down. The technology is much better now for LASIK than it was 20 or 30 years ago. There's more sophisticated equipment, but that sophisticated equipment brought the price down. That's what happens. Based on what you're saying, computers should be far more expensive today than they were in the 1980s. After all, they're much more sophisticated. They run much more sophisticated programs. They do a lot more. Therefore, by your logic, computers should be more expensive. But they're not. They're cheaper. Technology brings costs down, not up.
I respectfully disagree. In the 1960s, you basically had a doctor that was diagnosing something. You didn't have 10 different, X-rays, and you've got an entire industry.
What do you think? What do you think this was in the 19th? You think we had a bunch of witch doctors? You think in the 1960s you went to a doctor, he did a dance, and he had a bunch of juju beads and some potions? We had a pretty sophisticated medical care system back then. And look, to try to say that it's different now because we have more older people. We have all these drugs that we didn't have back then that can cure things without operations. It should be so much cheaper to deliver health care today than it was in the 1950s. The only reason it's not is because of government. Anyway, we're out of time. We could talk about this for a long time, but I thank you for your call. Everybody, thanks for listening. For those of you, we still had some callers that were on hold. I'm sorry we couldn't get to you, but we will be here again tomorrow. Hopefully the regular line will be up. Who knows? Maybe I'll be able to do this show from my own studio tomorrow. Hopefully we get the power back. We get the video back. Anyway, that's it for today. You've been listening to the Peter Schiff Show here on SchiffRadio.com, the gold standard in talk radio.